A tree hugger has never had a greater champion. Welcome back once again to the Speed Boost Study. I am your host Camixs, back at it again with my friend Michael Kang here to lead the pact. Please, Michael, be normal. Just this once. Aw. Well, that could have been worse. In any case, today we're going to be taking a look at the Druid class, and unlike my previous videos, I'm going to be more focused on actually getting to the test rather than go through everything about the class. It's not to say the informational part isn't helpful to understand, but I'd rather just go ahead and jump into it first and foremost. Before we officially begin going over to Speed Boost, let me put a caveat here and say that there are more Speed Boosts in this class than what I'm putting out here, but since the measurements would be different from the standard that I put up in the introduction of this series, I figured that the 4 I've chosen for this video will suffice. So let's begin. The 4 Speed Boosts I will be covering for the Druids are as follows. First, we'll be taking a look at Stampeding Roar, followed by Dash, Wild Charge, and then Tiger's Dash. Take it away, editing version of me. This ability can be learned by a Druid at level 50 as of the recent meta, and can only be learned by the Guardian and Feral specializations of the game, meaning if you want to be a Restoration or Balanced Druid, you'll be missing out on this ability. This becomes even more confined to the Guardian specialization when you realize that at level 80, the ability goes from a 2-minute cooldown to a 60-second cooldown, an advantage that Feral specialization does not have. When used, Stampeding Roar will transform the user into either bear form or cat form, and will not be removed if you opt to switch out of either forms after that, meaning it can be technically possible to use Stampeding Roar's effect in your natural humanoid form if you're needing to pop into it for a quick heal. The ability all around is effective, useful, and can be a major part of survival for many druids in many different circumstances, but how fast do you actually go with it? To find this answer, I opted to stand 30 yards away from a training dummy that oh no. He's a tree now! Great! Why do you haunt me, training dummy? Anyway, I stand 30 yards away from the training dummy and use the Druid's taunt ability to get the precise yardage that I need. Along with this, I set up a macro so I can ensure that the stopwatch and auto run are all moving cotangent with one another to get the best possible results. Finally, to ensure the results are as accurate as can be, I repeat this test 5 times to ensure that I can get the precise average to account for my human error and my secondary stopwatch. The purpose of this is to test my speed, which is distance over time. If I have a base of 30 yards and then calculate how long it takes to cover that 30 yards, then we can get the speed from these two numbers. Let's go ahead and test now with our Stampeding Roar to get the results we want. Here's a small montage of me doing just that test. Right then, here are the average numbers I got for Stampeding Roar's 5 attempts. As you can see, the average seconds range from 3.3 to 3.7 seconds. When I got the average of these numbers, it came out to a 3.5074 seconds or 3.51 seconds rounded up. This gives us the number that we can use to calculate the speed. To get the number, we'll divide the 30 yards from the 3.51 seconds to get a total of 8.55 estimated yards per second. Now, in order to double check our work, we're going to go ahead and take the 8.5 and multiply it by the remaining 4.49 seconds, and you'll get a roughly 39.74 yards covered in that time interval. Add 30 yards to that remaining 3.51 seconds, and you'll get a 69.74 yards covered in an 8-second time interval. Let's also take that number and multiply it by 8 just to be sure. This is a way to double check it. Since we did some rounding, I'm not expecting the numbers to be the same, but fairly close. So if we take that 8.55 and multiply it by 8, the number comes out to be 68.4 yards, which in my standards is close enough. But since this is the actual number being multiplied by the speed variable, I'm inclined to go with the latter as the final distance. So to recap for Stampeding Roar, the distance is noted to be a 68.4 yards, covered during the duration of the ability, which is 8 seconds long. Finally, for our speed, we get a noted number of 8.55 yards per second covered. 1 down, 3 to go. Let's move on to an even easier one from here. Dash is the druidic ability that I honestly have the least bit of problems testing. I like the current Dash and its speed boost study, and I'm about to explain why. To put it simply, Dash and Stampeding Roar are the same ability and its base stance. While one is more selfish in nature and the other one is more selfless, they both share the base stat of 60% movement speed. This means that in order to find the numbers for Dash, all I'd need to do is turn to Stampeding Roar. Since we already have the data for the 60% movement speed equaling to an 8.55 yards per second interval, we can safely say that Dash will be equal to the same number. Basically, we've done the work. All we need to do now is multiply this by 10 seconds instead of getting to 8 to the final yard coverage. And that's exactly what I did. The total is 85.5 yards to a 10-second duration with an 8.55 yards per second interval. Gotta love using one part of a test to solve another part. Now then, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the more complex issues. Wild Charge is our next ability on the list, which I should exclaim that this ability will be more confusing than anything we've encountered to this point, and will likely have people kicking and screaming at me to change it later. But even so, this is my video, and whatever mistakes I make, you'll just have to deal with it. You see, the reason this ability is on here is for the study of one version of it alone. Not the bear form, not the cat form, not the stag form, and not even the human form, but the sea form. Yes, because of its wording and the way it's written, the aquatic form version of Wild Charge is what we'll be going over. So, first I'll have to explain how swimming works in World of Warcraft. Traditionally, a person swimming with no buffs goes slower than a person running. The running speed is at 100%, while the swimming speed is at a 67%. This means that we're already starting off at a 33% deficit. But to make matters worse, the aquatic form for Druids adds a 100% swim speed whenever in use. Now some of you might be thinking, well great, the Druid's moving at a 160% movement speed, right? And honestly, I thought this too at first, but then I went back and had to realize that the 67% movement speed is different from the 100% speed increase. Basically put, the 100% increase is telling you to double it, not add. And so what I ended up getting was a Druid moving at 135% movement speed instead of at 167%. Some of that might be confusing, but basically put the 100% and it's asking you to double the 67%, not add 100%. And this gets even worse. The 150% movement speed given from Wild Charge Aquatics version is needed to be added to the 135%. Again, you need to treat this like a different number. The Druid isn't actually going at a 285% movement speed because you don't add, you're essentially multiplying by 1.5. This means that the final Druid's movement is about 202.5 or 203% movement speed. Why is this important? It's basically telling you that without me taking off a drastic amount from the numbers, I can't safely drop the initial 135% movement speed back down to 100% since the aquatic form doesn't quite work that way. It's really confusing, stupid, and frustrated me at first, but I figured I'd just suck it up and tell you about it and get the calculations. Even so, to make me feel better, here's a small montage of me doing an aquatic form run. I have, that's your bank statement, right? I want to take a look at this. What? $2,000 for salmon? That's a wild charge. Really? Are you actually proud of the joke you just made? No, not really. Really. Just go make them laugh or something. I've got work to do. All right. So this test felt a lot less traditional than the usual ones, but I'll be honest, after seeing how convoluted it would have been to deduct the numbers to get the most basic form of the ability, I figured I'd let it slide and just do the normal math that I would with other abilities at their basic form. Here are the numbers I got after each test, falling in between 2.3 seconds and 2.8 seconds with their average coming out to about a 2.57 seconds. This number can be divided by 30 yards to be given a speed stat of 11.67 yards per second. Now comes the point where we should check our work. Let's start off with getting the remaining time that the ability should have continued. If we take the 11.67 and multiply it by the 2.43 seconds to round out to the rest of the number, we should get a distance of 28.36 yards, which, when added to the 30 yards with the already covered, should come out to about 58.36 yards. Now, on the other way of checking, the numbers need to be close. If we take the 11.67 and multiply it by 5 seconds, we get a number of 58.35, nearly identical. But we'll go with the latter as it feels more definitive. So there's our numbers for the aquatic form Wild Charge. Now then, for the last one. Tiger Dash is an ability that I didn't know how to tackle as it is unique to everything else in the game. Say what you will about the previous measurements, but they were at least consistent, run-of-the-mill speed boost all the way through. Tiger Dash does not follow that mode. On paper, this ability seems to be a solid choice, so why is it so hated by the World of Warcraft community? One thing I forgot to mention, this ability replaces the dash ability, meaning that you can't have both and you're essentially placing a toss-up on whether or not you want a burst of speed or consistent speed. So is it a better ability or is it worse? We're about to find out. So I really did have a difficult time trying to figure this one out. It didn't run like the traditional speed boost in World of Warcraft, as its ability loses speed increments by about 40% per second. So to do the same thing as I would have done for the other speed boosts wouldn't make sense, because those speed boosts had consistent speed throughout the trial. This one does not. I sat there for a little bit, mulling over ideas until I came up with two that would satisfy the quota I was looking for. The first one would have been tedious, and the second one would have been a lot more simple, but give a little less data. You'll see why I chose the second one in a moment. The first idea would have actually been to calculate each burst of speed in its time intervals, meaning that I'd calculate the 200% speed movement from 5 to 4 second marks, the 160% from 4 to 3, so on and so forth. I'd then take the speed of all these numbers, add them together, and divide them by 5. Here's the problem though, there's no way for these speed boosts to have made it to the training dummy in the 30-yard interval. In order for that to have done that, the ability would have had to hit it into 1 second. And while the first part might have been able to do that, I know for a fact the other parts wouldn't have been able to. So I'd have to sit there and find each yardage for where I stopped. Combine that with almost having to be perfect on the run from 1 second to the next, and well, it becomes almost impossible in World of Warcraft's current standard to do so. So rather than go through all that, I decided I'd need a better method, and boy oh boy did I find one. So the first method involved doing each second separately, but this method actually involves doing it all together. Now you might be wondering how that would work, as I previously mentioned that the speed decreases over time, meaning that doing all this together wouldn't make much sense. Well, it wouldn't if we just did the traditional 30 yards, but what if we opted to start further away from the training dummy, so we can run the test to its full 5 seconds, see how much distance is covered, and then get the total speed from that. Basically, we'd be finding out the distance before the speed, instead of the other way around, playing it out to its full duration. I had to get a couple of friends to help me out with this one, so special thanks to them for being a part of this experiment. To put it simply, we found a target on a flat surface and rooted it down, and kept it there for the whole time. We had 2 druids for this, so that part was easy. I moved back the usual 30 yards in order to keep things consistent, but then I set down a marker to show that 30 yards on an indicator. Once the marker was set, my other helpers came and stood on it, challenged me to a duel, and had walked back another 30 yards to make 60 yards, and just to be sure, we did this twice so we could go as far back as 90 yards. I tested it from this far away, and the full 5 seconds blew out just before we could hit the 90 yards. When it stopped, I stopped, and one of my helpers stopped on top of me to be a placeholder. He then used this ability called Charge to determine how far away the ability was from the target. As you know, you can use Charge 8 yards or more away from the target. You cannot use it under 8, as he indicated that the target was less than 8 yards away. So we had him move back some, and what we led to believe is that the target was 7 yards away, because it didn't take much more before he got the green light to be able to charge directly at the boar. This meant that this ability was an 83-yard run over 5 seconds, which in total comes out to about a 16.6 yard second interval. All in all, we got the data we needed, and that's what the numbers came out to. So, time for the conclusion. The numbers tell an interesting story between the 4 contestants, so let's start off with what we came to measure. The speed between the 4 shows that Tiger Dash is the superior ability in terms of yards per second, covering 16.6 in comparison to its other opponents. However, it seems to be the only category it gets, as Dash ends up beating out all the other components in both distance and time, distance being barely above Tiger Dash with a 2.5 yard difference, and time being in 2 seconds against Stampeding Roar. Ultimately, the other 2 in this competition didn't have much of a chance to take the gold, as Stampeding Roar, in regards to its speed boost, is basically Dash with 2 seconds shaved off, and the Aquatic Wild Charge was hindered from the start due to how the swim speed works in World of Warcraft. But despite the numbers, I feel there could be more to be told about these abilities. Each one has different circumstances in which they can use for both themselves and the team. For me, it's always been about circumstances over numbers, and if I'm being honest, Stampeding Roar would be the ultimate victor. Its uses in player versus player of getting to allies quicker to an objective, be it killing a target or a capture point, can't be ignored. It really does suck for an opponent when they have to deal with an enemy speeding right at them before they can pop a heal or get out of the sight of their enemy. On top of that, using the speed boost is almost essential in some fights for raids where the group needs to move quickly to another objective or risk certain intimate death. It really was proven useful in Antor's The Burning Throne on a number of different occasions, and it has continued to be some of the best of its kind. If we only look at what the question is of this video, the answer lies with Tiger's Dash. But I want to know what you all think. Leave the comment down below saying Klutz so I know you watched the full video, and give me your opinion on the Druid forums. Thank you all for watching, and be on the lookout for the next video when we cover Hunters. Take care.